Hi everybody, hope you're having a great week. I'm going to talk today some about Chapter 8, Arranging Consequences that Increase Behavior, that I want more sensation. I wanted to make a quick teacher note. I'm doing my recording using Screencast-O-Matic. It's a fantastic free website that allows you to record up to 15 minutes and then post it. Great teacher tool for pre-teaching and reteaching students skills they need to have. So we're doing some pre-teaching for some of you and reteaching for others. So let's roll and see what's going on with arranging consequences that increase behavior. We're going to start by talking about positive reinforcement. And you'll remember from the very first class, positive reinforcement is doing something or giving something that increases the likelihood that that behavior is going to occur again. So a positive reinforcer should be given usually right after the requested behavior. So I've got the example of crazy baby here. Mom says to baby, give me high five. Baby gives high five. Mom gives baby candy. Give me candy. That giving of candy is going to increase the likelihood that the next time mom says, give me five, that now that child is going to give a high five to get more candy. When we're looking for effective reinforcers, there's lots of things we can do to make sure that we're getting to the right reinforcers. So the first thing we can think about is reinforcement history or what's worked in the past. I know that Dan has always liked Skittles, so there's a good chance Skittles will be a great reinforcer. Let's think about deprivation state. If a student has already been satiated or had a lot of something, then the likelihood that that reinforcer is going to work is diminished. So an example that was told to me back in the day is a kid who loved butter pecan ice cream, and the teacher found that out and started using butter pecan ice cream a teaspoon at a time as a reinforcer, and it was working really well. And then the child came in after a long weekend and the ice cream no longer worked. And when the parent was called and said, hey, do you have any ideas? The parent said, yeah, we found out she loves butter pecan ice cream, so we fed it to her all weekend long. So she'd been satiated on it, didn't want it anymore. Although according to the cat, you can never have too much coffee, so maybe that's one for us adults that's not going to reach satiation, but you definitely want kids to be in somewhat of a deprivation state. So for those of us that have watched the movies and know this, but I want it now, I want it now, the importance is the perceived value of the reinforcer. So if the reinforcer that's being given out in class is pretzels, and I hate pretzels, then I don't want to work for that. But if the reinforcer is chocolate, I love chocolate, I want chocolate, I will work for that. Kids also need to know that there's some consistency with reinforcers. Some teachers do a poor job of consistently reinforcing, so the child thinks, well, if I earn it, maybe she'll give it to me, maybe she won't, so maybe I'll work for it, maybe I won't. You also need to think about age appropriateness of reinforcers. Some kids love things that are not age appropriate, so we want to be careful of peer stigma. An example of that is we had a 10-year-old who loved Barney, all things Barney, but that was no longer age appropriate. So what happened is if the child finished the task that they were supposed to, then they were allowed to go down to the counselor's office where no one else was, and they were allowed to watch 5 minutes of a Barney video. The kid was really good about using a timer, and once the timer flipped over, then they would turn off the video and go back to class. So you need to make sure that the reinforcers you're using are age appropriate and are not going to cause any stigma. Something you can do to check on a reinforcer's power is do what we call reinforcer sampling. And so one way that I did this is at the beginning of school and then periodically throughout the school year, I would have what I would call free time, and I would put out strategically around the room all the different reinforcers that I had in my classroom. And then I gave the kids 15 minutes and took really detailed notes about where kids went. So if one kid was all about the puzzles, then I noted that puzzles might be a good reinforcer for them. If another kid was on the computer playing Starfall, then I knew that that might be a reinforcer. If another kid was over in the snack area, then possibly snacks are a reinforcer that are valuable to them. So doing that reinforcer sampling and seeing what has power and what doesn't is important. Some kids reach satiation pretty quickly, so you might have to do that reinforcer sampling more often. When we're thinking about reinforcers and thinking about primary reinforcers, a really important note is that you can never withhold things that are required for life. So you can never withhold from a child water. You can never withhold meals. You can't withhold sleep. Those things are called torture. They are not therapeutic, and they can lead to charges of child abuse. You can withhold extra things from children, but you need to be careful about how you do that. I would never recommend withholding a party from a child. I would never recommend withholding recess. Exercise is crucial to our success. Parties are crucial to our social emotional development. You might want to think of an alternative activity for a child, but you don't want to withhold those events. So make sure that when you're looking at primary reinforcers for students, you're thinking of things that aren't going to be life-threatening, aren't going to be viewed as abuse, that if they're given or withheld, that those are socially acceptable. We know that within the confines of school, sex is not acceptable as a primary reinforcer. It might be one of the primary reinforcers for us in life, but it is not something that we can have anything to do with at school. If children are tired because they're not getting enough sleep at home, we obviously can't withhold that from them. We obviously would never withhold shelter from a child. We can use food as a positive reinforcer. Just know that within the academic day, kids are given whatever meals are given to all the other students, and they have plenty of access to water. But definitely a Dr. Pepper could be used as a reinforcer. Definitely Skittles could be used. There are some schools that don't use food as a reinforcer. You can use other things, but make sure that whatever you're using is socially, ethically appropriate. Deprivation and satiation are important conversations that we need to have and important concepts we need to think about, because for an enforcer to be powerful, students have to be somewhat in a state of deprivation, and we don't want to reach satiation. So there's that fine line between this is reinforcing and this is given too much and the kid no longer cares. So how do we prevent or delay that from happening? Think about that world of choice, right? If there's lots of choices and we're using things at different times, then the power of that reinforcer should remain strong. So you might want to put a reinforcer's power with different activities. So a reinforcer that you use in math might be different than the reinforcer you use in reading, or the reinforcer you use to get a child to complete a task is different than a reinforcer that you use for appropriate walking in the halls. You might want to also think about decreasing the size of edible reinforcers. That's an important health concept. I've put a picture of a pill cutter here. We used that a lot of times. We got new pill cutters and we used them to cut Skittles in half. We cut Smarties in half. We cut M&Ms in half or in fourths, so that kids didn't reach satiation, especially those kids that needed a one-on-one correspondence, which means you do one math problem, you get one reinforcer. That pill cutter was important to have things cut into the smallest pieces possible. So you want to think about variety, you want to think about smaller sizes, and you definitely want to think about whether you can switch reinforcers across topics. There are lots of fantastic sensory reinforcers, things that we use in our everyday life that we don't always think of, but these are sensory reinforcers. Within my realm of favorite sensory reinforcers are the ones at the bottom, the proprioceptive. Lots of kids love to rock, to swing, to bounce, and so having opportunities to do any of those things can be important. Tactile reinforcers can be important for some kids, and that can be a change of seating location. That can be using different textures in their writing. So I would give kids the opportunity to use different pens, different pencils, different kinds of paper. Taste can definitely be a sensory reinforcer. In school, a lot of times we use auditory and visual reinforcers. If you finish this task, you can go look at a favorite book. You can listen to a video. You can listen to music. All those things are great reinforcers. When we're thinking about secondary reinforcers, those are things that sometimes are paired with a primary reinforcer. So we're thinking about things like verbal praise, that we might start out by giving verbal praise when a student does what we want. We say, "Great job," and give them a Skittle, and then we start pairing back the Skittles but continue with the "great job." Some secondary reinforcers can be preferred activities like coloring, and often are utilized through some kind of a token exchange or a ticket exchange. You earn so many tickets and then you get to have whatever that reinforcer is. Tangible reinforcers are those things that I physically can see. One of Dan's favorite tangible reinforcers is this stacker toy. And if he sees that come out of the cabinet, then he knows that when he finishes the task in front of him, he gets to have access to that and he works much faster, much happier. It definitely increases the likelihood that that behavior will be seen. When we are thinking about activity reinforcers, there's this really cool principle called the PREMAC principle, and I'm sure you read about it and hopefully you'll remember it. And that's pairing low frequency behavior, something a child's not likely to do, with something that they are very likely to engage in. The example here is if you eat your vegetables, then you can go outside and play. So we had some kids who loved doing math problems, but did not prefer to do a reading comprehension activity. So they would be told, as soon as you finish your comp page, then you can do the math problems. As soon as you finish writing a paragraph, then you can get on the computer. So you're pairing a least preferred activity with a more preferred activity. There are some limits to that, in that there are only so many times a day we do certain things. An example we sometimes use is finish this and you can go to lunch. Well, you only go to lunch once a day. So after lunch, you need a follow-up reinforcer. Recess, I could use multiple times because I could give short bouts of recess. So that could be a continued giving. I can continuously give access to a computer. I could continuously give access to drawing materials. But some things, if they can only happen once a day, you have to be careful to use them appropriately. When we're looking at generalized reinforcers, we're looking at some of those bigger picture things. So praise, giving kids money, using token systems, giving social reinforcers like everybody that finished that, have a high five. And those are important generalized reinforcers, and we definitely want to be working towards those. Having said that, some kids might never make it to a generalized reinforcement system, but it's definitely a goal we should have in mind. Token reinforcers are used really widely, and they're fantastic systems. We can individualize those. We can use them for a whole class, so we make sure that every kid has access to that kind of reinforcement. But token reinforcers are always, that symbolic representation that students have to understand. If I get so many coins or so many stickers, then I get to choose a backup reinforcer. We do have to be careful if we're doing this with a larger class that we're making sure that kids have the ability to maintain their system and that students within the classroom aren't going to be stealing them, taking them, copying them. And we can set up some procedures around our classroom to protect it against that when that's an issue. Social reinforcers are fantastic if a student likes a social reinforcer. Not every kid wants to hear great job. Older students especially might be embarrassed by social reinforcers. So make sure the reinforcer you're choosing is something that's appropriate for that age group. When we're looking at contracting, this is a fantastic system to teach students from a very young age that they are responsible, accountable for their behavior, and they can help establish their own systems of reward and consequence. We need to make sure that what we're doing, again, has reinforcement for the student and is appropriate within the confines of what's going on in that school. The advantages of contracts is it's obviously encouraging kids towards greater independence, and it can be tracked just like any of the other reinforcers can be. I'm going to fly through these next few slides to try and keep us in our 15-minute time frame. I really encourage you to look at this reinforcer delivery graph. It's got some great information in it that will help you understand what kinds can be used for groups and individuals and how we can administer those within group contingencies. You can definitely individualize for an entire class using a master system like a token system, where some students would earn 5 tokens within a given period. Some students might earn 1, but the same system is the master system. I want you to think about, as you consider those schedules of reinforcement, that you're doing things with the highest rate of reinforcement when you're teaching a brand new skill or a very complex skill, and that you're trying to thin that schedule of reinforcement over time so that you're giving less and less rewards for more and more work. If you've got any questions about the information that I've given in this presentation today, we'll be talking more about this in class over the next few weeks. And you can definitely check out Chapter 8 slide to see there's a few I left out. I hope you have a great week of learning. Let me know if you've got any questions.